I'm Ruth Wasserman-Lande. Today is December 4th, 2024. This is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We are live on Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and available afterwards wherever you get your podcasts. Please start submitting questions in the chat, and as always, like and subscribe to help us reach a wider audience. UNRWA isn't a real aid organization. It has failed to distribute most of the aid deliveries in Gaza. UNRWA spends a lot of effort on PR, much of which benefits Hamas, but is not really helping the Gazans. This organization just dramatically announced the halt of their Gaza aid work due to theft in Gaza. Now that is a first-class act in cynicism, because Hamas are the ones stealing the aid and selling it on the black market and shooting Gazans who dare touch the aid before they do. Moreover, UNRWA is just one organization which deals with distributing a relatively small percentage of the total aid. In fact, in November, UNRWA brought 3,381 tons of aid, a mere 6.3% of the total. Now compare that with the World Food Programme, which brought 20,536 tons. That's 38.5% of the total aid. A current Gaza Hamas leader was the head of the Gaza UNRWA Teachers Union. Now, not to be confused with the Lebanon's Hamas leader, who was the head of the Lebanon UNRWA Teachers Union. So you see how intertwined Hamas and UNRWA really are. Anyone concerned about the welfare of Gazans should demand, defund, and dismantle UNRWA. Meanwhile, Hezbollah continues violating the ceasefire while saying at the same time that Israel is violating it. Hezbollah tries to move around the areas where they are not allowed to move, promises money to Shiite Lebanese who want to return to their homes in south of Lebanon, compensation for their losses, thus working on anchoring their leverage over the local population once more. Also, it fires rockets at Israel, and yes, Israel strikes back at Hezbollah's rocket launchers. It's not just that Hezbollah is not supposed to be firing. Hezbollah is not supposed to be armed at all. That's, by the way, according to UN Resolution 1701 from 18 whole entire years ago. Hezbollah must disarm. Now, who will disarm Hezbollah? Lebanon's army is not disarming Hezbollah. Some of it is already infiltrated by Hezbollah operatives and sympathizers. The UN forces are not disarming Hezbollah. Perhaps they're too afraid. So the IDF is acting to stop the Hezbollah. It's acting against Hezbollah in Lebanon and outside too. Yesterday, Israel announced another strike in Syria, for example. Israel eliminated Hezbollah's liaison with Syria's military in the heart of Damascus. This liaison officer was behind the transfer of Iranian weapons from Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon. You see, Hezbollah is Iran's terror army in Lebanon. It is supplied by Iran's partner in Damascus, Syria's Assad regime. And during much of the civil war in Syria, Hezbollah fought in Syria to keep Assad in power, while perpetrating horrific atrocities against the Sunnis in Syria and other minorities. Now, Israel will not allow Hezbollah to rearm in Lebanon or anywhere else. Now, let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Chris Palacios on YouTube asks, who will be distributing the aid in Gaza since the UN isn't doing a good job?
Well, thank you for that question. There are quite a number of international aid organizations, not necessarily related to the UN, that are indeed distributing the aid. Is it easy to distribute the aid at the moment? No, it's not. And the specific reason why it's not easy is because of the Hamas bullies that are in fact taking weapons and threatening not only the Gazan population, but also the aid workers against taking the aid and distributing it because they want to have it, to distribute it, and to keep the power in their hands. This is the difficulty, not the lack of distribution or aid organizations.
Amanda on Instagram asks, how likely is it that this sham of an aid organization can be defunded permanently in reference to UNRWA?
Which organization can be defunded? Can you please repeat?
Amanda asks, how likely is it that UNRWA, which she calls a sham of an aid organization, can be defunded permanently?
Perfect. It is a sham of an aid organization. Thank you, Amanda, for saying that. I wasn't 100% sure that I heard right. But how easy is it to defund? Well, the international arena, the West, in other words, by the way, the biggest part of the West is actually the United States of America, but there are other countries as well that fund the United Nations and particularly UNRWA. This needs to stop in order for UNRWA to stop being funded. It is a decision by the United Nations, which is supposed to keep the peace. But instead of keeping the peace, it's actually keeping and perpetrating the refugee problem by maintaining this organization that is doing absolutely nothing for the relief of the people living in Gaza and for the actual solving of the problem of the refugees. In fact, it perpetuates the problem rather than relieving it or solving it.
Allison on Instagram asks, what's going on in Syria? Is it good or bad for Israel?
Well, that's a complicated one, and good, it's not good, but it's not bad. Why do I say that? What's happening currently in Syria is that the Assad regime, which basically is in cohorts with the Hezbollah, remember the Shiite arm of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as the Islamic Republic of Iran, was basically massacring, slaughtering, attacking its own people that wanted to revolt against it. This was happening for a few years. And in the last more or less year and a half, there was more or less stability or quiet. What happened with the IDF hurting Hezbollah very, very strongly and significantly was the weakening of this Shiite arm, and therefore the sense or the feeling that the Hezbollah will not be strong enough to come to the support of Assad. And that was the feeling that the rebels, or rather a big group of very radical jihadi Islamists who are Sunni, that usually don't get along with one another, but in fact they got along because their lowest common denominator is their hatred against the Shiites and against the Assad regime, and basically moved forward to attack. The Assad kept anchors inside of Syria, and they did gain some success, in fact, significant success and territory. Now what the Islamic Republic of Iran is doing is sending Shiite militias from Iraq to Syria to help them and the Assad regime take that territory back and maintain stability again. These are jihadi Sunni radical Islamists, and these are jihadi, not Islamists exactly by name, but very, very radical Shiite groups on the other hand. And both of them are radical, they are extreme, and not very compatible with Western values, to put it lightly.
Why is France calling out the rightful actions that Israel is taking in Lebanon as violations of the ceasefire? Why are they involved at all? Are they acting in good faith?
So the French administration and leadership has been doing a few very strange things lately, and it seems as if the current administration and the presidency in France is basically speaking to an internal constituency that is both very left-wing and also Islamist in its thinking. And this is a big problem. Now, France has a long time history with Lebanon and sees itself more or less as the father or the caretaker of Lebanon, in that it created it and sees itself as responsible for maintaining its stability, none of which it has been doing in the past years. Lebanon has been in a very deep depression in terms of its economic status, as well as the fact that the Hezbollah has basically taken over, which means that the Islamic Republic of Iran is ruling there. So is the French administration and presidency acting in good faith? In my humble opinion, the answer to that is no. Is Israel to blame for attacking the thinking and expectancy of Hezbollah attacking Israel? Israel is going to take not one chance. If it sees that there are launches of rockets on the Hezbollah side, on the Lebanese side, it will attack, because this is self-defense. And that is the simple truth behind the move.
Talia on Instagram asks, do you think that since Trump has said he will get the hostages back, that Hamas is reconsidering a ceasefire?
We need to understand the Hamas is showing and showed and will show zero flexibility. The ideology is extreme and it's radical, and they're there to create a worldwide caliphate of extreme radical Islam throughout the entire globe. However, by saying something like Trump said, he's basically indicating to anyone and everyone who has been supporting the Hamas that they better watch out. Like, for example, Qatar, that it will not tolerate, America will not tolerate anything that will be short of bringing those hostages back. And in a manner of speaking, it is basically the United States is indicating by the statement that Hamas is and will be isolated, and that steps will be taken against it. Is it creating some kind of a flexibility in an inflexible organization like Hamas? No. But it is showing that America is very serious and indicating that it will not tolerate any other activity but to hand back the hostages, which means all those around, including Iran and Qatar, etc., to play along the American tune right now, which was not the case before.
Thank you, Ruth. For our final question, Ed Barr on YouTube asks, can the residents of the north of Kiryat Shmona and Metula and so forth return home? What does the ceasefire mean for them? When will schools be reopening?
So the ceasefire at the moment is in its first stage, the 60 days in which everything is being tested out. The IDF is slowly taking steps back while the Lebanese army is supposedly taking steps to put itself in the IDF's place. Is there a huge skepticism amidst the civilians in Israel that are northern civilians of Kiryat Shmona, but not only Kiryat Shmona, regarding this agreement? Yes, there is a huge skepticism. There is very little trust in the Hezbollah. There is an expectation that the Hezbollah will continue to try and rearm and reorganize itself in order to, in the future, attack Israeli civilians. And there is also a little bit of skepticism regarding the willingness and the strength of the Lebanese army to carry out what is expected. However, the IDF has said that it will do everything in its power to prevent the rearming of Hezbollah. But yes, it's difficult for the civilians of Kiryat Shmona to go back, even though there are no rockets at the moment and there are no sirens. But this may be a little bit short-lived. Thank you so much for watching with us. And as always, we'd like to remind you, tomorrow at 3 p.m., we'll be here again. That's 8 a.m. East Coast time. And we want to have you with us again. Thank you so much.